Increasingly, as we move towards site-based management, you won't only be interacting with the superintendent and his or her staff, you'll also be interacting with building site principals and their administrative staff. So relationships are critical. And we've been blessed with Ben Scungio and his staff for the last several times that we've done this sort of induction for new school committee members and for the veteran members that are here, because it's always good to get updated and refreshed on what's happening. Ben is now part of the law firm of Brennan, Scungio, and Kresge. He focuses on educational practice. He represents, you probably have seen him at some of your school committee meetings. He represents a number of school districts in the state. He is probably the emeritus when it comes to legal counsels and legal issues. One of the things that we had earlier, two presentations, one on the open meeting law and access to Public Records Act, and the other one was on ethics. And they graciously will, acknowledge your questions and answer them. But if you do have questions, one of your greatest resources would be the school attorney that knows, state law and more importantly, state regulation, because there is as much regulation emanates from RIASC as statutes emanate from the State House. So I'm going to have Ben introduce his team. Again, there probably this is the most important session of the day, because if you start off on the wrong foot, either with your administration or your fellow committee members, sometimes that you just can't recover from that. So this is really, really an important session. And Ben, I'll let you introduce your team, and you can have the floor.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Everybody still awake? So we're really happy and pleased to be here because this area of the law is a main focus of our law firm. We've been doing this for about 35 years, and we love education law, and we love to be able to come out and present and talk about our feelings and our passion for this area. So with me today, I took 3 other attorneys, because what way to make a topic more exciting than to have more attorneys talk about it, right? So that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to try to make this as exciting as we can, and we're going to have a participatory part for you all as well. We're going to try to get through it as best we can. We only have an hour and a half, and for attorneys, that's a nanosecond of time in terms of talking, because we love to do this. Talk, that is. But I have here today Sean Clough from my firm. Sean is a former school committee member and a former chair of a school committee in Smithfield. Actually, he was the youngest chair of a school committee in the state. He brings that kind of experience, so he's able to answer questions, and we hope we do get questions today that deal with directly what happens with him when he sat as a school committee person and when he sat as a chair, and that gives really nice insight. Have Amanda Cascione here. A lot of you know, applause. Amanda has a following. Amanda has been with us for 1.5 years, but she's had 10 years as a criminal prosecutor. And she brings that kind of experience today to this presentation as well. And she's handled anything from misdemeanors to the most serious crimes. She's focused the last 1.5 years, especially in education law and in litigation. And she's been a wonderful resource for our firm as well. A lot of you know her dad, Ron Cascione, who's now a judge in family court. Ron used to be a member of my firm. He was my partner for 30 years. So he was a loss, but I still tell everybody that we traded up when we got Amanda, which was the point. Last, we have Chris Murillo with us today. Chris is new to the firm. Chris has 25 years as a special education teacher and a master's degree in special education. So he brings that component to the presentation as well. So he can answer questions and has a perspective, especially in that particular area. Chris obviously focuses on education law as well as a couple of other areas in our firm. So what we prepared for you today is a lot of the documentation has been passed out. We've also passed out a QR code for you. You can either snap a picture here, or you could take a picture that you have on your table, and a lot of our materials were passed out. So everything that we're talking about today, including the statutes, a booklet that we put together, which is an orientation booklet for you, and a lot of other materials are on our website. You can get access by going to, information will be available for a while, so you can click on it anytime if you want it, but you have most of the materials that you need right now, including, you'll see our presentation. So with that said, could you put our presentation on? And it works, that's it. So when we got together and we talked about this presentation, we tried to think of, within about an hour 15 minutes to allow questions, how could we explain to you the things that we think are the most important in terms of your roles and responsibilities as a school committee and individually as individual school committee members, because we want you to be successful in what you want to do. We don't come to the table, and your legal counsel doesn't come to the table with a political perspective. Our job is to help you be successful within the bounds of the law, and our experiences and our wisdom we like to share with you in that regard. So we kind of boil things down to 5 what we call schoolyard rules. And those are the rules that we want to explain to you today. Included with those, and we want you to take a minute to do this, we passed out 6 different situations, A through F, and what we plan on doing is we're going to give you now 3 or 4 minutes to look through some, and we're going to designate different areas, and then we're going to ask somebody in the designated area at a table. We'd like you to talk about the situation among yourselves, and when it comes up in the course of our presentation, we would just like somebody that you're going to pick as a representative, and we know you can all do this because you're all politicians, so none of you are afraid to stand up and talk, and just briefly explain the facts, and then we're going to talk about what your table's reaction was, or the group around you reaction was, and where you think the situation could go down a good road, a bad road, and why. Then we're going to have suggestions from our point of view and what we've seen going through hundreds, unfortunately, of school committee meetings and seeing all these things play out one time after another. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask you to look through the situations. Sean, could you designate areas for me?
Sure, I just want to go by table.
Sure.
So, I'm just going to have to recite the alphabet a few times here. A, scenario A, B, C, D, E, F. Starting over again. A, B, C, D, E, F. A, back there. B, C, D,
which you might call answers, are provided on the website along with the questions as part of the materials if you ever want to get to them. Obviously, we've only handed out the factual parts. Okay, so let's talk. Which means me, not you. Okay, let's go. So what are we going to talk about today? We think the important issues that we want to talk about are power and its limits. We want to talk about oversight versus management and how to operate effectively and get something done as a school committee person. Especially the last bullet is probably the most important point to you because you're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy running for office, developing ideas. You have a lot of passion for education and for students. Some people also for budget issues and other technical issues, and all that is fine. But how do you get anything done? And hopefully we give you some insight into how that happens. And that's the most important thing I think that you need to take away from our presentation. If you don't understand the rules and you don't understand the nature of the game, that's going to create for you nothing but frustration, right? Because you're constantly going to be banging your head up against the wall. So we hope to relieve some of that frustration by explaining some of the ground rules, some of the parameters, some of the guardrails that have been set up, So hopefully that eases your way into your school committee, it eases your way into your actions, and makes you realize that some of the things you hoped you can accomplish may not get accomplished the way you hoped, or may not get accomplished in the form that you had hoped for. So it requires compromise, change, intelligence, besides just passion for your job. Also, just a quick note about pecking order. I remember, because I have so much longevity representing school committees, I remember probably about 25 years ago, a school committee woman came to me and she said, I'm kind of an important person now. And I said, why? And she said, well, I'm a school committee person now. I've been elected to a very high office in my town. This was the town of North Providence, by the way. And the chair at the time looked at her and said, Helen, let me explain the pecking order of politicians in North Providence. You're just above the dog catcher. That's it. In terms of politics, you're not on the top. But in terms of your impact, as a couple of other presenters has suggested, you are at the top. You're in a position to make the most profound change for the most number of people in your city or town. And it's a very important and weighty responsibility. Regardless of the fact that you don't get to vote on stop signs, and you don't get to vote on right-of-ways, you get to vote on children's minds and how they're going to learn. And what could be more important than that, especially today, right? So thank you for running, first of all. But your job is really difficult. It's also a little bit thankless. So we want to try to ease that as much as we can. So when we talk about rights and responsibilities, the most important thing that we have to look at, and probably the biggest takeaway for you, in terms of rule one and knowing your job's responsibilities and limits, is the Rhode Island Constitution. Rhode Island Constitution, who sets out who has all the power in this state. And if you look at it, it says the diffusion of knowledge as well as of virtue among the people being essential to the preservation of their rights and liberties shall be the duty of the General Assembly to promote public schools. Who has all the power in the state of Rhode Island? General Assembly. General Assembly created you. The General Assembly can destroy you. The General Assembly can set all parameters about how you operate. So I had a superintendent who called me this week and said, could you send me a list of unfunded mandates? They're really frustrating me. And I want to explain to the town council how we have all these responsibilities. And I heard some of you today kind of not complain, but express frustration at unfunded mandates. The reason why they exist is because the General Assembly thinks they're important, because they've set that as a rule of the game that unfortunately we all have to live with, right? So that, for me, is the first and most important rule. The General Assembly is impacted by all different interest groups at all different times. Sometimes it's unions. Sometimes it's folks that have interest in education. Sometimes it's folks that have other interests that are just as valid as education, and they require monetary resources. General Assembly's job is to prioritize that and then to fund that appropriately, hopefully. But we have to live with their decision. When the General Assembly or the federal government passes a law or a rule, we have a responsibility to follow that. Many of us don't like it, either from a political point of view or from a monetary point of view or a philosophical point of view. We just don't have a choice. We have to follow that because that's the nature of our job. Because in a very large sense, we not only work for the people and our constituents, we work for the General Assembly because we are literally their creature. Rule number 2.
All right. This picking me up? Oh, there it is. Okay. So rule 2, we're going to cover school committee members. And if I'm not mistaken, this is where our first scenario comes in. We'll talk about the Code of Basic Management Principles and Ethical School Standards, and then I think it goes right to the.
Yep. You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Situation E, taking a political stand. So everyone in Group A who thought you were going first, you're not. Group E, you're going first.
Don't forget, we're attorneys, and we want to keep you back on your heels.
So can the Group E people across the room raise your hand so I can? Is there any one of you who'd like to explain to everyone else kind of generally what the scenario is about?
Sure, the only one who didn't raise their hand. So our
Here's a mic.
story was about, Hi, everyone. Keith Catone, Cranston School Committee. So our story was about, there was a politician from a neighboring state, sounds like a congressional, like U.S. congressperson who said some heinous racist things. The scenario is written in sort of a first person. So like you're upset, you're all sort of fired up about this, and you're at a school committee meeting, and one of our members noted it's at 9:45 p.m. and it's the board member report session of the meeting, and you decide to make a motion to have our school committee publicly condemn these comments, calling for him to step down from office, because this would be a good example to our community that we don't tolerate hate speech per our district policies. And so it says, I've said it, I'm pumped up, and surely my fellow board members are going to chime in with agreement, and the public will praise me for taking a decisive stand. And then am I saying what we thought? Or is I'm just saying?
Well, so certainly you can definitely add your thoughts. So while we're just thinking of that scenario, let's think things that potentially could have been done better, or things that we see these are pitfalls of in terms of what a school committee member should or shouldn't be doing. So since you were so kind enough to introduce it to everybody, if you or your table would like to add more.
So our table decided this was most likely this guy. No, I'm just kidding. That was more about the timestamp with extra comments. But we said a number of factors reach in. So it was A, this was a congressperson from another state. B, this was not something on our agenda. C, this has no real relevance or impact on our schools, our students, our community, our families at the moment, and that it likely was not the most appropriate time to take such a decisive stand, and that would have been more appropriate sort of to raise as something we would, if you even did want to discuss with your colleagues in a work session or something else and get it on an agenda, but to actually think about that the relevance of that conversation for the purpose of our business, which is our local public schools, which in our assessment, this situation didn't really have any impact on.
So I'm hearing lack of relevance. I'm hearing taking a political stance that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your school board, and I'm hearing a topic that isn't on your agenda. Is anyone else who studied this scenario that would want to add anything? Or do we think we've hit the waterfront of all those issues? Yeah, I think you all are right on with the concerns in this particular scenario. So certainly, as you hit, you're asking the district to take a position that's a feel-good position. Whether it's right or wrong, if this isn't about the issue itself, it's the fact that this is not an issue you would bring up at a school committee meeting. Certainly talking about ensuring that your school department is adhering to all anti-discrimination laws and anti-discrimination policies. That is certainly something that you would be able to discuss if it was properly posted on your agenda. But simply taking a stance against another political person from another state just because it feels good is unnecessarily injecting politics into what really should be a nonpartisan, non-political committee. And of course, you open yourself up to a floodgate of resolutions like this once you have, oh, okay, you don't like this particular person. Well, I don't like the other politician down the street. So next meeting, I'm going to have a resolution against him or her. And it sort of ratchets it up at that point. Yes, ma'am.
Inappropriate remarks, that the chairperson should have banged the gavel and told him he was being inappropriate and asked him to cease.
I think that's an excellent point, and this is why, selecting a chairperson that is knowledgeable about the rules of OMA and knowledgeable about these types of issues can move in and say, this isn't on the agenda, this is something that wouldn't be appropriate to talk at a school committee meeting. I'm asking for you to cease your comments so we can move on to our business, especially since, as you all pointed out, it's 9:45 at night. What are we doing?
Anybody have a different point of view to platform political issues, because it's probably going to detract from your school committee's business, which is supposed to be serving the interest of kids? Yes.
What if the congressperson delivered those racist remarks on a school building, like at a school building or on the school property during school hours, or in some way, in front of parents or teachers or students? But it's still not on the agenda.
Well, so that piece, I think, answers your question, at least in part, that if it's not on the agenda, we really shouldn't be opening up the discussion, because you're going to be setting yourself up for an OMA violation. And if there were remarks that were made in front of students from someone who was visiting, it wouldn't be unnatural for a school department to open their doors to elected officials, to have some type of civics event, and someone says something, certainly, I think at that point, it's not really a school committee to sit there and discuss about how bad this person's particular comments are, because you're still injecting politics in it. But would it be appropriate for superintendent to make sure that if there's concerns coming up from the community that why was this allowed to happen, you would have a superintendent handle something like that? All right, so now looking at some of these statutory authorities that you have, 16-2-9.1, the General Assembly is telling you here that your first and greatest concern is the educational welfare of your students. Certainly you've run for school committee on a whole host of issues. Obviously students are first and foremost. You want to make sure that students' lives and their education is improved. But there's also concerns you hear from your town residents about the budget and taxes, and how the education budget line item in your town is the biggest budget line item. And that is driving the cost of taxes. So I'm electing you, school committee member, to hack away at that budget in order to ensure my taxes either stay this level or decrease. That's what I want you to do as a school committee member. And while you have control over your budget, while making sure things are run effectively and efficiently, your greatest concern always needs to be the educational outcomes for students in your district. That's what the General Assembly is commanding you to do under the law.
Let me just,
Yeah, absolutely.
just for a minute, I just want to let you know that the four statutes that we're talking about, Tim passed out, so you have copies of all those. And those are the foundational statutes. It's the authority of the school committee. It's the ethical rules that school committees must live by, as stated by the Rhode Island General Assembly. It's the statutory duties and responsibilities of your superintendents, and the statutory duties and responsibilities of your principals. We're going to reference all of those. In case you lose them, they're also on the website, as I mentioned before, so you could always download them as well, okay? I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Another area of critical responsibility is selecting a superintendent. One of the most important things you can do as a school committee member when you have the opportunity because of a retirement or a superintendent's moving to another district to select a new superintendent. But even if you're not selecting a superintendent, you still have the opportunity to evaluate your current superintendent, evaluate them regularly, define their responsibilities within the confines of state law, and engage them in the administrative process. That's your oversight function, making sure the superintendent is following policies that you have implemented, making sure that you're getting feedback from constituents, feedback from students, feedback from teachers about how that person is performing in their role, having direct communications with them, about how they're fulfilling their role and their function. It is probably the greatest power you have as a school committee member to make sure your district is moving forward.
And you'll note the final bullet point on this is not to engage, and there'll be more on this, on administrative processes. That's not within your job responsibility.
Or you have the procedures to resolve complaints and criticism of school affairs. Recently, I was working with a school district who has some people coming forward who want to utilize a policy that they have on the books to complain about something that they believe was not followed appropriately. There is a procedure in place on how those complaints are funneled up. Another important piece of this that I can touch upon is the fact that you as school committee members will likely be sitting on the top of that process. So this is going to funnel up. Maybe it's a parent who has a complaint about a teacher acting unfairly in the classroom. Now, if that problem can't be resolved at the classroom level, maybe it goes to the building principal at that point. Then it goes to the superintendent, and ultimately it may then go to you. That could be a typical process that we would see. That is a function that you hold, oversight of that process. We want to make sure that that process is being followed. All right.
Okay, so we have situation A, acting poorly in public meetings. So a hand up if you had situation A. Which groups had situation A? All right, so if you are, this is a polarizing thing, this whole fact pattern. If you are a person who cares about language and the precision of language and grammar errors and things like that, this might have struck a nerve with you. Who from situation A can give us a rundown of the facts? This is a lengthy fact pattern, so give us the gist if you don't mind.
So, and I was just exactly as he said, we get in our packet on Friday or maybe a couple weeks before, the special ed director has a packet of stuff that's going to deliver at a school committee meeting. And at the presentation, you're looking at it and you're saying to yourself, oh my God, there's all kinds of spelling errors, grammatical errors, and everything else. There may even be some substance areas there, and you're really, really upset. And you go to the meeting and question and answer time, she's delivering the report, and during the report, after the report is over, there are a couple of school committee members who ask questions. This one particular school committee member, not myself, is boiling because he's reading this. So he or she gets up in the meeting and basically states that anyone previously proved this or read this, and now the person's got anxiety over the fact that they brought this up at the meeting. So, as a group, we discussed about the fact, first of all, to be honest with you, I'm just a school committee member. My chair is here. So if I saw something that I didn't like in a packet, first of all, when the packet goes out, the superintendent should be reviewing it before it goes out in the email or in the packet if it's delivered to your home. Okay, so that may be the case that the superintendent didn't read it. On the other side of this, you're not in the position to chastise anybody publicly. We don't know, for example, if the special ed director is going through a personal problem right now, when really it was the responsibility of the superintendent to go to Mrs. Lasko and say, have you read this? You got to go over it, review it again. I'm not going to put it in the update that goes out this week for your presentation. That person may very well be someone, an employee who's having a lot of difficulty and maybe at the end of their term, so to speak, and I wouldn't do it at a meeting. First of all, if it came up, I'd be calling my chair and say, you need to get in touch with Dr. Garceau, let him know this is in the packet. That's not my responsibility. There's a chain of command that we have, and that's one of them that we have. And I know from being a superintendent that there is a chain of command. The other side of this is the fact that if this person is really having trouble, and we may be in a position to review them in terms of terminating them, where the superintendent is going to send it to you for review, you've kind of like, at this particular point, put yourself in a position the person didn't like me from the beginning, and therefore, that's the way it is. So that's the way we looked at it anyways.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm hearing, being mindful of your personnel, being mindful of the other people in the room, and just generally taking on an approach that's not going to be an I gotcha approach. The other, I think, key part of this fact pattern is the way that it's said, right? So it says it's full of typos and grammatical errors, reflects very poorly on our district. If a student handed in a report like this, the grade would be an F, and that's done very publicly in this case. Does anybody else have any other feedback on how this might be better addressed for situation A?
Well, the case stated that when you read the report several days ago, okay, you saw that. You could have easily at that point reached out to the person and said, this is full of typos and everything, had it fixed. Right, pretty simple. But, so in this case, I think the person made a choice. They made a choice to wait, and I'll just humiliate someone in public, so.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think it speaks to the types of relationships that we are trying to build with other school committee members and also administration and the administrative team, and those are crucial relationships, right? So some of you are school committee members and have experience. You may be veteran school committee members. You've already spent time building that rapport, building those relationships, and other people are new to it, and the importance of those relationships are crucial. So.
Also, I think it points sides and get some press from it. So I'm going to bring it out at a meeting. But there are a lot of negative, as Chris mentioned, a lot of negatives that come out of that when you do that. Because you're burning relationships, you're making yourself look bad, you're making your committee look bad. So when you have that kind of criticism, you really have to be self-reflective as to whether or not you want to do that, what your really goals are, whether or not that serves your primary goal, which is the best interest of kids in all cases, right? So think about that.
All right, who had situation C? Anyone? I know someone had it. Middle table? Can I get a volunteer to talk about situation C? Why don't you tell us?
Okay, the situation C was the committee member being, as he perceived, the only school committee member who attended a student program, which was 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. So probably the rest of them were still working or heading home. That's my interpretation of it. Instead of when the principal of the school invites Richard, the committee member, to give a few words, he launches into a political description of all the things that he is assuming his fellow school committee members are going to propose to improve that particular school building and improving the arts curriculum, etc. And of course, he didn't get a great reaction from the crowd because they had no idea probably what he was talking about. We can assume if they're parents, they're there to hear their kids singing. That's what the whole project probably was. But then he was saying, we on the school board, we're committed. He had not even, we can assume by this, that these were his goals, which he might not have shared with anyone before, or he's thinking off the top of his head, but he put himself in the place of the spokesperson for the school committee. And one of the cautions that we do receive is that you do not speak for yourself, that you work as a team, that you will reach consensus before a statement is made. Not that people all hold to that, but this is what it's supposed to be. So the fact that he must be new because he keeps saying that he found his newfound role of special dignitary. And when I read that, I thought it was funny that all of a sudden you're a dignitary, and they say, well, we're going to introduce the dignitaries. You say, oh, who are they? And sometimes you realize you're supposed to be one. But obviously this person is wearing the school committee hat to a great degree.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything with respect to situation C? You hit on some great points. Oh, I see a hand. Look at Richard.
I call himself a special dignitary. Tamp it down here, buddy. You're 1 of 5, whatever, 1 of 7, whatever you are. 20% of the committee. The committee's committed to providing increased funding. He's just made himself all 5 votes or whatever it is right there. And maybe that's true. Could have easily said something like, we consider arts and music to be very important in children's education, blah, blah, blah. You know, and it's then it ends with these ending goals that he has in mind for a long time as a board member. My first thing is, why didn't you take care of it before this split? So.
Some great points. Anyone else want to add anything? I think the really important takeaway from this is, do you have to watch everything that you say as a school committee member? And the answer to that is yes, literally everything you say. Obviously, we all have a First Amendment right? Like as a human under our U.S. Constitution, you can say things, but as a school committee member, there is a fine line because you, when you speak, you're representative of a body. As Richard pointed out, you could be one of 5, one of 7, and you have to be so careful because words can be twisted and used a certain way, and if you're speaking, there's going to be an assumption that you are speaking on behalf of the board. So there's a very, very fine line. You have to be so careful when you're speaking in any venue, and that also includes social media for anyone that utilizes that. It could be a conversation with just another person. Everything that you say in this role, it's very important to think about it. And I think that's pretty much everything. You guys kind of covered all of the main points.
That is. Anybody have any other comments on that? Yes, Louise. I didn't recognize you at first. How are you?
On social media, can you say, I am a member of the school committee, but I don't speak on behalf of the full body? Can
Sure.
you qualify your comments with that, with those words?
You can, absolutely. Today's not about social media, I wish it was, but one thing you have to be careful of, there are some recent U.S. Supreme Court cases that suggest that you, based on how you present yourself on your social media, on your Facebook page, you could actually convert that into a public forum, which then requires you to allow anybody to comment, and you have to post that, you can't block it. So you have to be really careful how you employ social media, and I know you're very well at it because you're very experienced. But keep that in mind as well. If you're projecting yourself as a public citizen, that's fine. We had a situation in a district a couple of years ago where a school committee person wanted to collect campaign contributions. So he made a copy of the town crest. He made up his own letterhead as a school committee person, and then he sent out a letter to the town, and he asked for contributions. And the question was, are you asking for contributions as a school committee person, which is not legal, or are you doing it individually for yourself? Because the government or the school committee can't solicit campaign contributions. So you have to keep in mind not only what your intent is and how you face the public, but how the public kind of perceives what your comments are. But certainly you can make comments, but they're going to have implications is our point, I think. Okay. Sean?
All right, continuing on. Act only through public meetings, since individual members have no authority to bind the board. So you going out, like this person did in this scenario, and saying, we're committed to X or we're committed to Y, you're attempting to bind the board where you have no authority to do as any one individual member, as Richard pointed out. You're either one of 5 or one of 7, depending on how big your board is. And this, right there in the general laws. You as an individual have no authority. You can only act as a board, a majority of that board, to implement any decision, any new policy, or hiring of a superintendent. The first bullet here, school committees have the entire care, control, and management of public school interest. And you know, how much does entire leave out? You might be saying, yes, here it is. Here's all my authority in the world, right here, the entire care and control and management. Step aside, superintendent. New sheriff in town. As Ben explained early on, not quite the case. You have a lot of bosses in this world, General Assembly being one of them, federal government being another, the Rhode Island Department of Ed being a third, Department of Education at the federal level as well. They all have the ability to either issue new laws or implement regulations that you as school committee members must follow. They're not up for discussion. They're not up for, well, we like this one, thank you, ride, but that one, we can leave it over there. You have to follow all of them. So that entire care, control, and management starts to get narrower and narrower and narrower as you have to work within the confines of the laws and regulations as we have them. Does not matter whether or not you agree with those regulations, or else what could happen? there's a finding that you're not following the regulations, the Department of Ed, Rhode Island Department of Ed can come in, penalize you, withhold funding, or you could have a private cause of action against a school district and incur liability. You do have the overall policy responsibility for employment and discipline. However, the superintendent has the administrative responsibility for employment and discipline. This is all in Rhode Island state statute. The superintendent has their own authority that is itemized in the law, just as the school committee does. So, in a way, the superintendent has their own powers given to them by the General Assembly to act under certain particular things, such as administering the employment mechanism within your school department, such as hiring folks and disciplining them. You get to set what the parameters of that look like, such as a hiring policy. So here you go. This is how we're going to interview people. Here's how we're going to then use criteria to select individuals. And the superintendent is going to make that final decision, because that's what the state law says. Superintendent has to make the final decision on hiring. And then you get to exercise your oversight function to ensure that that hiring policy is being followed. But you don't get to step in and say, and we like Mr. or Mrs. whomever, and that's who you're going to hire.
Can I do an add-in on that? So typically, what our firm recommends is you would do three things in this area. You'd have a very robust hiring policy. And of course, you'd discuss this with your superintendent in terms of what works and what doesn't work. Additionally, you have a compensation policy. So not only do you give them the authority to hire someone, but you set parameters, guardrails, in terms of how much someone can be paid. And that means you'd have to pay attention to certain criteria or set up a rubric. Experience, districts need, surrounding communities, whether or not you're able to find someone. So you'd want to have that kind of policy as well, with built-in certain budget parameters. And then the third thing is you'd want your legal counsel to put forth a set of template contracts, employment contracts, especially for administrators. So you make sure that those contracts include all your values, educational values, and they're also consistent. We find a lot of times in school districts that over times, different deals are made for different administrators for good reasons, but then everyone has different compensation schemes, everyone has different numbers of vacation days, different people have the right to take away certain benefits when they leave the district, certain OPEB benefits, and you really want those to be consistent. That's how you control those at the front end. That's certainly within your power, even though you can't pick the exact person that's going to work for the district.
All right, and quickly on budget. This is another area, like hiring the superintendent, where you as school committee members are at the apex of your power. This is where you can enact change, how you allocate funds throughout your school department. And like I like here, your budget demonstrates whether education is a priority in your municipality. There's that saying, don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget. And I'll be able to tell what your values are, where you're allocating funds, whether it's professional development for teachers, whether it's more to special ed, whether it's more to arts or CTEs, whatever the case may be. You have the ability there. This is somewhere where you can get into the weeds and understand how your budget works and how you want to allocate funds. And you always have to balance that competing priorities with limited resources that you have. The town is going to only allocate to you so much money within the confines of the law. You have to work with that in order to achieve whatever priorities your school committee has set out to achieve for that budget cycle.
One point I wanted to make is Mario told you about the vast amount of data that you can get from RIDE and other sources. It's really difficult if you, on an individual basis, try to become an expert in every particular area that you have an interest in terms of data. You're going to be missing stuff because you don't know what you don't know. But the person that works for you that should know what he or she should knows is your superintendent. So it makes a lot of sense if you have an issue to direct your superintendent to provide a report to you based on data that he or she can show to you that would drive a decision for you. So you don't have to figure out how to be an expert in a particular area or master particular data. It's good if you can do that, but it's a lot more useful for you and your school committee if your superintendent delivers a report to you on a topic and shows how the recommendations that he or she makes are data-based, right? That will do 75%, 80% of your work for you. Then if you wish to do follow-up work, obviously you can. If you want to analyze data yourself, you can, but at least you'll have it in front of you. Don't try to master all the data yourself or all the issues yourself. You'd have to be on a school committee for a long, long time to be able to do that.
Nice with others, right? Part of what you have to do is collaborate and develop relationships and work cohesively with a number of different entities. And so we're going to get into that a little bit here in speaking about relationships with RIDE, relationships with superintendents, and then with principals. So RIDE obviously has the authority to regulate, which they do, and some of the things just to kind of focus on that they have, some of the regulations that they have, just to highlight, which obviously I'm sure most of you, although maybe some of the new folks aren't, the basic education program is something that's implemented and regulates what we do. It outlines the rights of every student in the Rhode Island public education system. They also regulate medical marijuana administration to students, and they also regulate the education of homeless students in Rhode Island. So these are just highlighting some of the areas in which RIDE can regulate what you do within your district. And there's really not a lot of wiggle room in terms of these regulations and what you have to do. The other big piece in terms of RIDE's involvement, there are going to be a number of potential controversies that come up in your district. There's going to be a lot of things that happen at the school level and administrative level before it even gets to you. But some of you that have been on school committees have potentially sat on hearings before that have come to your level, and maybe some of the newer folks have not. But there's sort of this administrative process in terms of dealing with controversies, but at the end of the day, RIDE can hear pretty much all controversies after the administrative process has been exhausted. So what that means is essentially once folks within your district have exhausted all appellate rights, if you will, at that level, which ultimately would conclude with some sort of hearing, typically with the school committee, they can then appeal to RIDE, and RIDE can handle controversies related to virtually any decision that you make. So something just to be cognizant of.
Can I do an add-on to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Two things. With respect to the second bullet point, requirements for marijuana, could we back up one? So RIDE and the Department of Health cooperated on those requirements, so we put together a policy for a lot of school committees. When you use the word marijuana, a lot of people cringe. People on school committees cringe. But what I wanted to highlight for you is the Department of Health's regulation actually says every school authority must develop, and then it goes on and it says the protocols and procedures must include. So even though to a degree marijuana was, I don't think it is as much anymore, but it was a political issue for a lot of school committees and they didn't want to pass the policy, you were being told by an authority that you had to, and that policy had to include certain elements for medical marijuana use. Didn't have a choice. Typically with respect to the Homeless Act, also called the McKinney-Vento Act, for some of you that are familiar with that, it prescribes when you have to pay for transportation for a student whose family is homeless. And it also requires when you have to provide a student for services if the child's last school was in your school district. So if you were in Burrillville and the last school the child was in Burrillville, but the parents are homeless, but they're living in Newport, that child has a right to continue attending Burrillville School. That means you're going to pay for a portion of the transportation and for the school services for that child, because a federal statute tells you to. And there are regulations that back that up, both at the federal level and at the local level at RIDE, because they're required to do so. Areas where we don't have a choice. Unfunded mandates, but they still exist. Hi, Louise.
district?
Just an example of like an issue that's gone before them.
Yes. That they overruled.
It really could be anything. Like, let's just say hypothetically you have a student suspension, an out-of-school student suspension that the parent's unhappy with. They appeal that suspension, and it goes through the whole process at the school level. Ultimately, superintendent imposes the suspension. Let's just make up a number, 8 days out of school. That appeal would then go to you as school committee members, where you would basically hear evidence and information and decide whether that particular punishment was warranted. And let's say you say, okay, we've heard everything, we're going to uphold the superintendent's decision. Those parents then have the right to appeal to RIAD if they'd like. And so RIAD would then have, we call it de novo, but it's basically an independent hearing where they're saying we're going to look at everything just independently and make our decision in terms of what the punishment could be. So in that context, they could say, we agree with the 8 days, we think it should be 6 days, we think it should be 10 days. That's an example of one type of thing, but really there's a variety of things that could go before them.
Well, the reason why I was asking was because, you know, it's elected officials versus non-elected officials. And
Right.
to me, that is an inherent, that's a problem. So that's why I was asking.
You know, it is. It's a philosophical problem, but the General Assembly has passed a number of statutes regarding appeals and RIAD's authority. One of the statutes in particular, in terms of their authority to hear appeals, say that they could decide any decision that a school district has made that gets appealed to them. Any decision. Superintendent, principal, school committee. And the General Assembly said, hey, that's the rule of the game. We want RIAD to be the final arbiter before something eventually goes to court. So go to them. So once parents know that, they take advantage of that because they figure, geez, we got another bite at the apple. We don't like the result here. Why not take another shot? We have nothing to lose. But you're right, it is problematic because your decisions, in many instances, are not final, even though you would like them to be. So you question, why am I in the process, right? But you are there to give community voice to that. Yes?
So, just curious, where is the student while all this limbo is going on?
There could be a variety of scenarios because sometimes superintendents will maybe not impose the suspension while all this is litigated and dealt with. Sometimes they've already served the suspension because it takes time for these hearings to get to the place where they're actually before RIAD. Sometimes they've served part of the suspension. So there's a multitude of scenarios that can kind of play out in that fact pattern. Is that answering your question, or do you mean like physically where?
So say they gave an 8-day suspension, by the time it got to RIAD, they had served out their 8 days, and RIAD said, well, you shouldn't have served any suspension. So then what happens?
It gets cleared from their record typically, so it'd be.
Chris?
Ben, can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
With that said, as a person who has been in education for 25 years and was a teacher, I also really appreciated when school committee members would visit the school and make an effort to, introduce themselves to staff and just be recognizable and be there, because that meant a lot to me as a person working for a district. I knew these people were here to better our school, and that's a big deal too. So you can visit and make yourself, make an appearance and see what's going on in your schools, in your district, but there's also a fine line between oversight and management. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So it's what you do with the information that you have. As this gentleman pointed out, not to go find an IT person yourself, but now to have the superintendent, who is the person that's responsible to you, investigate that issue and come up with the solution if there's a problem, right? That's the protocol that you need to establish. If you don't, by the way, you undercut your principal's authority and you undercut your superintendent's effectiveness. And that's not going to be an effective operation of a school district, right? So I always say, if you don't like the job your superintendent's doing, what do? You get rid of him, you fire him or her, right? And get somebody that you do like and that reflects your values and is efficient or is competent. That's the power that you have, and that's the power you need to exercise.
All right, our last situation of the day, situation F. Where are my situation F peeps?
Come on, we're
Back
almost
there.
there. One
We're
more.
almost there. Would you like to? Anyone would like to volunteer to give us a brief synopsis? Gentleman in the back.
And they've had a series of meetings and done all the workshops and done all of the things to demonstrate to the community that they've given the community a voice in deciding whether to close the school or not. So now they're meeting in the final school committee meeting to determine whether they'll close it or not. But apparently the meeting starts by allowing each of the board members to speak on the subject. And then eventually there's one person that's adamantly opposed to it, so it's vociferous in his disagreement. But I think the issue here is that rather than allowing the superintendent to represent to the school committee and the community the rationale for closing the school, they let all of the school committee members speak without presenting all of the facts. So then the facts were presented, and the one person that was adamantly opposed remained adamantly opposed. But in the end, he stayed that way despite a vote that effectively was taken to close the school. And I think the gist of this is that the superintendent probably should have been allowed to conduct the essence of the meeting before it started with pandemonium in terms of getting the crowd in an uproar over whether or not to close the school.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments on situation F?
The only other thing I would share for other people who hadn't read this scenario was the fact that after the school committee voted on it and it was passed, this one disgruntled, I'll call it disgruntled, school committee member voiced their dissatisfaction with it to the public, really expressing that this isn't going to work and it's going to come back in repercussions. So we're supposed to be working together as a team to go forward, not reflecting different opinions on it.
Thank you. Yeah, and for anyone who's been on a school committee for more than a minute, have you had to deal with any sort of disinformation involving schools? Has that happened to anybody? That's not a thing. So I think what the gentleman said about getting information out to the public and conducting a meeting where the superintendent or those who are in the know can lay out for the community what the facts are, I think that's vitally important. So you as school committee members should want to encourage that, because ultimately, no matter what decision you make, you're going to want to be making it based off of facts that impact students. You want to be making a good decision that's well informed. So you need to have trust in your people that you've hired to give you that information and also convey that to the public. And the second piece that was brought up is, look, I've been a school committee member. I've been on the losing side of votes from time to time. It does happen. People can all be there for the benefit of students. You think you're going to achieve that through motion A, and I think I'm going to achieve it through motion B, and my vote loses, right? It happens sometimes, okay? Once you've lost a vote, that's not then the time to look at the rest of your school committee members and say, you're all terrible people. Because they're not. They have a difference of opinion on how to achieve the same objective you want to achieve, better outcomes for students. So, and think about now, okay, you've lost your vote. You can stand there and stomp your feet and yell, or you can say, okay, I have how many umpteen votes on how many other things that are going to come my way during my term, and do I want to burn all my bridges with my fellow school committee members right now by shaming them in public after the fact? Or do I want to have a rational discussion while it's the opportune time to do so before the vote, and then realize, okay, I lost this, I need to move on. And we need to make sure that now that this policy is going to be implemented, I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that that policy is implemented correctly. It's tough because you lost that initial vote. It's very human to be like, I don't want to be associated with this thing that they've done that I think is not the right thing to do or not the best way to get to, again, that ultimate goal. But ultimately, you go back to, we're a team. There's no I in team. and I need to move on and make sure that that policy is implemented appropriately.
So Tim, we're a little short on time, I know. Okay.
I think we only have a handful of slides at best left here. So, again, you are elected to join a committee, not for an administrative position. So that goes back to the working together. You're not the superintendent. You are a committee person. You have no powers to act on your own, and the school committee's power is in its ability to develop policy. Back to the working together with folks. Can you count? How are you going to get your vision implemented? You need to work and have a relationship with your fellow school committee members in order to get your vision implemented and work through consensus. You may not get 100% of what you want, but if you can get 60%, as opposed to burning all your bridges and getting 0, work with your school committee members. Oh, I was wrong. There is another situation. Surprise.
Huh? Yeah, a couple.
There's a handful.
We'll do this one quick. Who had situation D? All right, you can raise your hand first. Can you tell everyone quickly what it's about?
Sure. Situation D. The school committee member was approached by a reporter the day after a school committee meeting and asked for comment. Actually, it was a telephone call while the school committee member was at lunch. The school committee member initially tried to dismiss the reporter, saying, I'm at lunch, can we do this another time? And the reporter said, I'm on a deadline. I just have a quick question. And asked them something about, at last night's meeting, you didn't like the superintendent's proposal to extend the kindergarten day, of which the school committee member responded, yeah, to be honest, those cost projections are a little screwy, but we'll work out the numbers at our next meeting. And then said, well, you should probably talk to the superintendent about it. At that point, the school committee member kind of dismissed it, like I didn't make a comment, and went on with her business. So, do you want me to?
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So, my thought on it is the comment, actually, she did make a comment. One is the reporter fed her a line at last night's meeting, you didn't like the superintendent's proposal, of which her first word she responded with was, yeah. So she just agreed that, to that statement, which maybe she was just saying yeah because you say yes, you agree with people. The next part is she said those cost projections might be a little screwy, which really discredits her superintendent. And I think the final thing she said was, we'll work out the numbers in the next meeting. So there's a bunch of things that went wrong. I mean, media relations is hard. You need to be on your A game if you're contacted by a reporter. You need to address only what was covered in a public meeting. It's probably okay to comment on procedural things like, the projections, this was moved to the next meeting or something like that, something that would be already public record. But she went outside, essentially outside public record, made a comment. And I forget the exact, she's speaking on behalf of the committee as an individual, which is not good.
So that's some of the things that we kind of talked about. You're speaking, even if you're speaking by yourself, you could potentially be making comments that are implicating the committee as a whole. You made a great point in terms of media relations, and just to kind of sum this up, let me ask you this. Does anyone have an idea of a different way you could handle it if a reporter called you as a school committee member? Yes?
Call the chair.
Yes, that's an absolutely fabulous point. I think advice would be in the moment to take a step back, right? Because it may warrant a response from the school committee. Should it be a response from the chair? Should it be a response from the superintendent? You have to think a lot about motive, right? You guys have a job to do. Reporters have a job to do. They're asking you questions based on a motive to get a good story, right? And your responses have to be motivated by your responsibilities as a school committee member. So a big takeaway is to pause in that moment, even if you're getting pressure from a reporter to respond. Talk to your chair, talk to your superintendent, because really your answer needs to be, if there is one, needs to be well thought out and based on things that are appropriate to say. But anyone else want to add anything on that one? Okay, we can move on. Did I steal your microphone?
All right, and we've covered all this in terms of being a school committee member does not mean you're necessarily the spokesperson for the district. Looking at your municipalities, especially during budget time, there's always a tension between your local town government, who's going to be funding your school department, in your school district. And that tension is always there, that pull and tug. The school committee wants to be able to fund all of its programs. The town council thinks you're a black hole where you just throw money and it disappears and it never goes anywhere else. And certainly doesn't benefit students or their political prospects. So we have that tension, but we know, and it's as Mario had explained earlier on, the chronic underfunding of districts typically means diminished programming offerings, less robust programs, lessened ability to attract the best applicants for jobs because you're not paying market rate, lessened ability to provide for the needs of students. So what does this all mean? Having the relationships with those in your town, whether it's town manager, mayor, town council, city council, to express to them and have a conversation with them about how their funding decisions are going to impact outcomes for students. And that's how you can advocate on behalf of your school committee and on behalf of the students. And then finally, our union friends, union colleagues. Some people get onto school committees and say, oh, those teachers, they get paid a ton of money and they don't even work the full year, right? So I'm going to get onto a negotiating committee and we're going to hack away at salaries. Maybe that's the objective of your school committee. Not saying one way or the other what's appropriate, but in terms of understanding how to collaborate with your union, that's probably not going to be the best way to start off your first negotiation session. You're the ones who are going to vote on that contract. It's going to impact your budget. It's going to impact what your management can and cannot do. It's one of the only other areas that you have this great authority beyond policy, budget, and hiring the superintendent. So you want to make sure those relationships are there in order to make, again, we're hitting on this theme, best outcomes for students. Final thoughts?
One more slide, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. Don't go crazy. You bring a lot of passion to this job, right? A lot of energy to this job. Consider that 99% of your votes, your school committee agrees with you. They're unanimous, 99% of the times in all the districts that we represent, even in the ones where there's a lot of animosity between school committee members. So focus on that 99%. You can chip away at the other issues. You can convince other people with advocacy, not vitriol, and you can actually get things done. But understand you work with a committee, understand how to count to get a majority, and work within that paradigm, and I think you'll be a successful school committee member. And that's what we see among the four of us when we represent school committees that function really well, get things done for the benefit of kids. Anybody have any other questions for us? Yes.
One is through policy. You authorize a budget. That budget has line items. You're expecting that money to be spent on those items. Now, maybe there's money in a particular budget line item and you kind of squint and think, oh, that could be salary for a new position. Well, if we have a policy here that superintendent, administration, if you're going to be developing a new position or there's a need for a new position, you're going to bring that forward for some type of approval, whether that's approval of a job description, and to ensure us that that money is there, because now we're creating a position, and presumably that position is needed for more than just that immediate year and it's going to go away. So now it's a reoccurring expense. We as a school committee want to make sure that one, the money's there, two, the position that's being created makes sense for the community, makes sense to us as community leaders, and you're following the process, whether it's through policy or through state law. So I think you can have that there, and if there's positions that are just all of a sudden a new position is created that your school committee member had or your school committee had no clue about, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we created this a year ago, and you're like, well, we were all here a year ago and didn't know we needed this, or that we even approved funding for it, what gives? That's that where there's a lack of oversight, so you want to look back at policy and make sure your superintendent is coming to you when those new positions are needed and they're created and the whole process is identified.
There are also a lot of circumstances, for instance, if you need another special education teacher because you have to fulfill a need, or another TA as a one-on-one in a special education situation, or your superintendent needs to comply with a federal or a state regulation. We're going to have a new set of MLO regulations that come out. They're going to have additional burdens, unfunded mandates on school districts that we're going to have to comply with. You can expect that that's going to happen, and you can't direct as a school committee that that's not going to happen. But as Sean said, superintendents have to live within their budgets. So if you have a policy that has a certain amount of money for a certain area for budget, then you have another policy that says if you're going to vary from that, you have to come to the school committee and get permission to move that money. That ultimately is your control. Yes.
I'm not going to say it's a science, it's more of an art, but first of all, you should take some time to learn each of the members and kind of what they like and things like that. That's most of the time done off meetings, but you really have to make it your position to ask everybody sometime, do they have anything to add to a thing? Because you'll get members that are very quiet, and it may be they're a little timid at first, but once you get them going, and then you get others who will tell you their opinion on everything, you know, even if it's not on the agenda. I just really think it's kind of communicating and having that relationship with each of the members so that they know what you're doing, and your respect for them is that, hey, back to what we said, you're 1/5 of this committee, I'm 1/5 of this committee, and other than banging the gavel and starting the meeting, that's really the only extra job I have, you know, so.
Our power to act as write a letter to our elected officials, higher elected officials, to let them know, hey, we would like to get some support to raise money for our schools, something like that. Thank you.
So, I think, correct me if I'm mistaken. So, if you want to take actions such as write a letter to express your opinion to a higher elected, it appears if the school committee has made a decision about something, and certainly if there is some type of activity that it would make sense for the school committee as a whole to be a part of, that might be something that you bring back to the school committee and have as an agenda item. On the communicating with other elected officials, I've run into this problem with school committee members before, where they communicate with another elected official from another town, and that person then goes and communicates to their superintendent and says, oh, that other school district is doing X, Y, or Z. And the committee is now, wait a minute, we didn't decide that. Another community thinks that they're doing so. And it was all about how it was communicated. So I think that's really the important takeaway. When you're communicating with others, you don't lose your ability to express your own personal beliefs about X, Y, or Z, but it's how you communicate that and the impression that you create on others. Does that make sense?
To you. So if you have any other questions, we're going to stick around for a little while. You could ask us in the hallway or after he's done. Thank you very much for having us here. We love being here, hopefully as much as you enjoyed listening to us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, a real good round of applause for Ben, Sean, Christopher, and Amanda.